Hey there, so I've got one that you may be interested in. I'm going to show you how to set up the gimbals. The gimbals can be tricky. For your first couple of attempts, they will be tricky and it'll be confusing. To best learn how to do this, it's hard to show in a video because there's so many different axes that you need to worry about. But if you want to really know how to set it up within like 5 minutes, book it out and practice it over the weekend. And I would recommend that if you're planning on using a gimbal while on shoot or while out field recording or whatever, because you do not want to be the one that's holding everyone back half an hour because you don't know how to set up your equipment. Okay, 2 things I'm going to use here: the gimbal kit itself and a camera. Get to the camera in a little bit. So I'm going to set that aside now. I would recommend you take note of how all this is exactly laid out, because it all needs to go back in the exact same way. Take a photo, commit it to memory, whatever. If you've took out the gimbal and you've tried to put it back in, you'll know it can be a struggle sometimes. So take note of how it should be, how it should look like. You've got 3 sort of main parts of the gimbal. Up here you've got your base. I'll take the foam part off, put that back in so you do not lose it. Well, you've got 4 main parts, but you get your base. You've got your sort of middle connection, which goes on like that, but I'll set that there now. Just get the main part here. The gimbal itself. Underneath the gimbal, you've also got your battery compartment in there. Just take out your batteries, set them aside, cover that back up. You've got these 3 little parts here. I'm going to leave them in the box for now, but if you lose one of them, you've got me to answer to. So make sure you keep track of where these are and do not lose them. We'll get to that in a minute. Oh, I should say as well, if you do need to charge up your gimbal, you've got some cables in there. You will need to source a USB to wall socket, but you get USB cables in there. Right, set that aside. To assemble the gimbal, your middle part here is where the batteries go into, okay? I'm pretty sure it's negative side down. We'll find out in a minute. So I should say as well, negative side, positive side. The negative side's always at the bottom, positive side's at the top. So this is your gimbal part, it screws in at the bottom. Be careful, make sure that you've got it in the right thread as well. The threads are all made of metal, so if one of the threads had to go, it would be quite difficult to fix. So please make sure you're putting it in the right threads when screwing it in. So to be honest, you could start up like that, but if you're connecting a camera, which I'd like to hope that you would be, I would always recommend you put it on your tripod stand. So now that the batteries are in, at this point as well, if you're not sure, you could always try turning it on by pressing and holding your right button to see if you have a flashing light. If you have a little light flashing there, then your batteries are in the correct way. Okay, now that I wouldn't turn it fully on, just make sure you get a little light flash when you press that. Put in your tripod part, which I would flatten out and screw in. Once it's in, I would then open up the tripod part and put it in the table flat, ready to connect the camera. Just like that. So the way that we really want this to sit when the camera's on it is like so. Just to give you an idea. Camera, today I'm going to be using a 1200D. Very basic camera. It's just to show you how I'd put it on. You may struggle with heavier cameras like the 80D, although it is doable, but it's very tight. I shouldn't have done it together when I was showing him how to use it. And it is a tight fit, but it is doable with the AED. If you are using heavier cameras, don't be silly, don't try and put a black magic on it, don't be crazy. But if you are using a heavier DSLR, then just be careful of the motors inside, because if say that you get a heavy camera on and you're wanting to do that really cool tilt shot or something, the motors in this can only take so much weight. So if you damage the motors in that, again, you've got me to answer to. Okay, you've been warned. I understand the equipment can break, but if you're being silly with it, that's on you. Enough threats, let's get back to this. Straps, I would take them off. Simply because once the camera is set up, straps move about, and any fluctuations in weights can offset your camera. So strap off. Excellent. So I'm just going to set the strap to the side. Before you start connecting to the gimbal, you want to make sure that everything is on your camera that you want to be on it. Make sure you get battery plugged in and an SD card in. Make sure your battery is a Canon battery at full charge. This isn't a Canon battery because I'm not using it for this, is just for demonstration purposes. The reason why I would say make sure it's Canon battery, not a third-party battery, is because it's to ensure that you get as long as possible when it's on the gimbal. When your camera is on your gimbal, you want to try and preserve as much power as possible, because once your camera is set up properly, as soon as you take the camera off, the full gimbal will need reset. Make sure your SD card's in and a full charged battery, preferably the battery that came with the camera or properly branded. If you've got a flip screen as well, you don't need to worry about that now, but you will need to worry about it in a second. So we want to take out one of these screws that I threatened you about earlier. Do not lose it. I'll get to the other one in a second. And what you want to do is, again, just set up your gimbal as you would. So again, this is the way this is the way that you'd usually set it up. If this is the right hand side and this at the back. This is where it can get a little bit difficult. You want to set your camera on top like that. And then you want to get your thread underneath this plate and onto the camera. So to do this, I usually lay the gimbal flat and just let the gimbal sit the way it wants to. Put the thread in, bind the thread in the camera and just tighten it up so it's secure. Okay, so my camera is now set. Do not just let go. You can break your camera or lens. Be gentle with it. Because if I just had to let go, my lens would whack against this part here of the gimbal, so just be careful. Now this is where the fun bit begins, trying to calibrate your gimbal. There's all these different golden thread parts here are different axes that you can change. So you get one there, you get one in there, you get one here, and you've got a couple in here. So there's a lot to change. This is where you need to be kind of smart and just think about what's going on. Camera's tilting forward currently. This is where I'd want to either bring the camera back or bring the whole gimbal back. I could bring the camera back by loosening it off on the plate and actually bring it back or forward on the plate. So I brought the camera back as much as I can, but as you can see here, it still isn't back enough, it's still leaning forward. So I would then go to this screw up here and bring the whole gimbal back. See how much of a difference that is made compared to forward there like that. So you just need to try and think, if the camera's leaning forward, I want to bring things back. If the camera's leaning to the left, I want to bring it to the right. So yeah, again, this is more practice. I keep on saying so a lot, I'm sorry. The way to fine tune it is to worry about the thing that's the worst the most. So now the camera's tilting forward quite a bit and it's slightly turning to the left. It's only slightly going to the left, so I'm going to worry about it tilting forward first, okay? Worry about one thing at a time. So it's tilting forward, I'm going to bring it back. That's fairly straight, so I'm going to tighten up this thread up here. Not too tight, you just want it tight enough just so it can't move, okay? So now it's tilting to the left, so I've got a couple of choices. So while doing this, I found a little thing, okay, which I should have noted, but it has been a while since I've used this. This is my excuse. When you're setting up your gimbal, you want to make sure that at the front you've got this little screw here. Because while I was doing this video, I figured out that the gimbal wasn't even properly set up. It was flipped like so. So the full gimbal is actually backwards. This is the back end of your plate. So if it's like that, you just want to flip it over so that you get this thread at the front, okay? Sorry for the error, we'll get back to the video. Okay, so back to the video. So yeah, you just want to adjust the thing that's most prominent. So now the camera's tilted to the right, so I want to either move the camera to the left or I can move the full gimbal to the left. If I want to just move the camera to the left, I'll be moving it on the plate down here. I can move the camera, loosen it off, move the camera left, and that helps out quite a bit. But usually you would want the centre of your camera to line up with the centre of this here. So ideally, I want to keep my camera as far in that way as possible and move the gimbal itself out. Out a little bit too much, so I'm just going to edge it back a wee bit more, a little bit more, stay about there. Again, don't tighten it too much, just tighten it enough to catch it. Now my camera's tilted up the way, so to bring it forward, camera's tilted up the way, so to try and even it out, I need to bring the camera forward. To move the camera forward, I've got this little screw here. This screw allows you to move the plate backwards and forwards, so I need to move the plate forward. So I'm just going to loosen this, bring it forward a little bit. It's pretty good right there, so I'm just going to tighten that up. Before we go any further, I would get to this stage so it's nearly there. Then I would worry about your little things like lens cap and your screen. So if you want to flip out your screen, I would do that now. Tilt your camera down, flip out your screen and bring it back. It's then going to offset it so it's like that. It's going to put more weight to the left hand side. So to fix that, you just need to unscrew this and move your camera out a little bit to straighten it up. At this point here, I would also adjust your lens cap. So it's very minimal, but you probably won't even be able to see it on camera. But as soon as I remove the lens cap, like that's pretty straight. As soon as I remove it, tilts it up. So at that point there, I would then want to bring the camera forward ever so slightly. If you're using a heavier lens, that is where you'd want the camera quite far back, I'd say. Now the last two pieces that are in the box are these two here. That is to go in here. And it's to try and just help take the weight off any heavier lenses. Just like that, it tries to help the camera a bit. Because this is only a small 50mm lens, I don't really need it. But if you're using a heavier lens, like, I don't know, an 18-55 maybe, or even, well, yeah, I would say even an 18-55, the camera would be further back and you would need that on just to help support the lens. I'm not going to use it now because it's not needed. And again, do not lose those two parts. So now that my camera is pretty well set up, I'm going to make sure that all parts that are golden is fairly tight. Well, not too tight. You only want to tighten it until you feel resistance, that is it. So just make sure everything is tightened up. And I think I'm sort of good to go there. Maybe bring the camera back a little bit. Yeah, perfect. The way to test it is you grip the base and lightly do that. You do not want to smack it about the room. You just lightly rotate it. As the camera rotates, it will show any issues you've got. So with me, It's maybe adjusted it ever so slightly that way, but it's not too bad, I'd say. I'd say that's pretty good. So I'm good to go, I'm good to film. At this point, you've got to turn it on. The on button is your right button. You press and hold it for, I think, 3 seconds. You'll see a flashing blue light, and it'll turn on. Once it's on and you get your flashing blue light, you've got this button over here, which is mode. That allows you to change the way that the gimbal is going to act. There's really only 2 that you should really there's 2 that I've seen most students use, so that's the ones I'm going to show. And it's the first 2 modes. So the first mode allows you, if you use your dial, allows you to tilt the camera up and down. It doesn't let you pan left and right, only up and down. It locks it in that. And it'll also try and keep the camera upright if you move. Press mode once, it'll let you now move, and it'll let you pan left and right and also tilt up and down. And that's the 2 modes that students often use, and again, keeps the camera stationary as you're doing your thing. So that's 2 modes that I recommend that you use now to get familiar with it. There are 2 other modes, but I'm not going to worry about that now. Yeah, that's a very lengthy tutorial, but the main issue is getting it set up properly. Once it's set up and it's good to go, you're sorted. But if you need to change a battery, you'll need to take the camera off. If you need to change your lens, you'll need to recalibrate. If you need to swap your SD card, again, you might need to take the camera off depending on where your SD card port is. So yeah, make sure that you've got good quality batteries put in, because once you need to take the camera off, you need to recalibrate it all, which takes time. So to turn it off, I should say as well, press and hold your right button again for a few seconds. You'll see a flashing amber light and it will just shut down. Hey there, so I'm just adding this in post, but just to give you the heads up, if you haven't set up the gimbal properly, you can encounter a little bit of an issue here. You got to remember that once you turn off the gimbal, all motors that are holding the camera in place will shut down. If you haven't set up the gimbal correctly, i.e. if you haven't set up the camera so it was perfectly straight, then when the gimbal shuts down, all motors that are securing the camera will turn off. So say that you had the camera pointing downwards initially and then you turned on the gimbal will fix that. But as soon as you turn the gimbal off, the camera's going to jolt back down and you can damage your lens. If you're not confident that you've set up your gimbal correctly, then I would recommend that you put a hand out ready to grab the camera just in case. So yeah, that's how to set up the gimbal. This has been a lengthy video, I do apologise, but hopefully it's been informative enough so then you feel a bit more confident when putting out the gimbal. Just take the time out, practice using it, and once you can set it up once, keep on practicing it and you'll be able to do it within about 5 minutes or less.